In Matthew 5:13, Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet." This analogy of salt is both about our vocation as Jesus followers, but is also a warning if we follow our own way. Jesus wants us to become his salt, a salt that preserves, a salt that enhances, and a salt that is truly salt.
So when salt is preserving food, the goal is to keep the original state of the food, the goodness and the freshness of day one. So back in May, Josh and I took a trip to St. Augustine, Florida for our 10 years of marriage and work together. And several times during that trip, we went out to watch the sunrise. And the best part actually wasn't the sunrise. It was the fact that as the sun slowly made its way above the horizon, just more and more people would come out to witness it take place. It was as if there was an unofficial event summoning people to come and gather at 6 a.m. and maybe even sacrificing sleep to get out there, just to partake in something beautiful. And whether they acknowledged the creator of the sunrise or not, they could look at the sunrise and say, "That's good." And in a similar way, salt, Jesus' followers, are like the beauty of the sunrise. And just like the sunrise, we are to reflect and to point back to our creator. And when we function as salt, our lives won't be focused on the rot and the decay around us, but instead we point others, as well as sometimes ourselves, to God's original intent for his creation, which is to worship him. And it's in this act of worship that we reflect his beauty and his goodness and his truth. And we walk in step with God, manifesting his kingdom here today.
So our second point, if you're taking notes and take away from that verse, is that salt enhances the earth. So I love cooking, and anyone that likes to cook or knows how to cook, you know that whenever you add salt, it brings out the goodness in a dish. And if you add too much salt, you have an oversalted dish, and no one likes an oversalted dish. Similarly, no one likes a salty Christian. Someone who's often upset, bitter, angry, rude, or overly critical. Rather than being the loudest in the culture wars, we believe that Jesus is calling each of us to practice the act of culture care, to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. In our work, we've filmed interviews with all types of people. We do a lot of documentary work, so we were put in a lot of situations where we have to have conversations with people. And we've interviewed politicians and pastors, scientists and sex offenders, activists and architects, but they all have one thing in common. They want to be heard and they want to communicate clearly. And so as their interviewer, our job is to make sure that they're comfortable and that they feel heard. So we have to make sure, if we want to have thoughtful dialogue, we have to listen intently and truly be present with them. And when we're able to do this, we're able to create a trust that then we can go deeper into the deeper questions, but even give pushback on certain things. And that's how you get an authentic story when you're interviewing someone. And no matter who sits on the other side of the camera, this is true. They were made in the image of a glorious creator that loves them. And so then I think about like what would happen then if we truly saw each other this way.
So our last point is that salt needs to be salt. So as Jesus talked to his followers, he told them that they were salt. As Josh and I have shared, the vocation of salt, so serving as a preservative as well as an enhancer. But buckle up, here comes the warning. So Jesus says, if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. In other words, he's saying, if you, a follower of Jesus, are not following Jesus, what's the point? Is it good for anything? Ouch. It's easy to point out areas of cultural decay around us, but are we willing to acknowledge our own lack of salt? Many days I personally feel overwhelmed by the weight of wickedness and brokenness in our world. We may all respond differently to this weight, and perhaps it's anxiety or being pessimistic, depressed or numb, overwhelmed or cynical. But without the love of Jesus, we risk following into either the way of culture or have our hearts hardened towards culture. And our emotions and our circumstances, they're always changing. We all know this, but the truth of who God is always remains. And sometimes our job is to be salt to ourselves before salting others. And to come back to that God's original intent for us to worship and to commune with him. You cannot be Jesus' salt without Jesus. So how does salt become salty? How do followers of Christ become useful again? It looks like going back to the source. Spending time with Jesus, becoming like him, and doing what he did. Only then are we able to preserve and enhance the world around us. Otherwise, what's the point?
If we want to be salt in the marketplace, in the long run, we need to prioritize prayer before being productive. I want to practice the words of the Apostle Paul. Devote yourselves to prayer. Be watchful and thankful. Be wise in the way you act towards outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. May we be a people, the people in this room, be a people with conversations seasoned with salt. A salt that preserves, a salt that enhances, and a salt that is truly salt. As you go about your day, remember this. Jesus wants you to be salt in the office, on the job site, during that meeting, and in your own home. You are to be salt in every corner of your life. So go and be the salt of Christ wherever he has placed you.